Greetings everyone, welcome to LEGO Rewind, where we take another look at all retired LEGO themes, and welcome to Season 3, the last season until a couple more decades go by and I can look at today's products because they'll be old. Going back a ways, Construction, that's Constructible Action Figure, has evolved as an aesthetic through several lines over the years, and its longest enduring form was Bionicle, a juggernaut of a theme that ran from 2001 to 2010 and ended rather disappointingly when the stars did not align. But we're not here to relive that tragedy, we're here to talk about its baby brother, HEROFACTORY. Yeah, they knew we were going to be sore about this. They put "from the makers of Bionicle" right on the box. The premise of HEROFACTORY is pretty basic. The heroes are built in a factory, they fight the bad guys, and that's it. Tune in next week to see it all go down again. I'm not making fun of it, I swear. That simplicity is kind of its strength. As much as I love Bionicle, it did have some inherent issues baked into it, and HEROFACTORY was created to be an answer to that. Bionicle had a lot of character-specific elements. Sometimes you get nice recolors, especially in its later years, but you still had a ton of pieces designed with an intended role in mind, to be used as an arm, or a foot, or a weapon, and many elements were only ever used once. Jala's mask is Jala's mask. If you put it on somebody else, you're just building wrong. And think of how absurd a sentiment that is for LEGO, that there could ever be a wrong way to build something, a wrong way to use a piece. HEROFACTORY's goal was to dial back the specifics and jargon of the roleplay elements and make it okay to build whatever characters you wanted. There weren't just 6 heroes, there were thousands, millions even, and your hero didn't have to be designed a certain way to fit into the story's universe. They could even have a normal human name like William or Mark or Duncan. Your hero could be anybody. And there was just one problem. The toys didn't embody this philosophy at all. The heroes themselves had an incredibly limited parts count, came in the same usual assortment of 6 flavors, and very simple builds, or one build rather, that was barely a step above the stars and somehow even less versatile. Now, I don't mind heroes being small. I actually like smaller figures sometimes because it's easier to make vehicles and scenery for them, and larger villain figures become all the more intimidating towering over them. But this first wave did nothing to evolve Construction as an art. It was just a discount version of what we had before. Even the villains' designs, while kinda neat, were just slightly dumbed down, less cohesive versions of figures we were getting before. And just in case you didn't have enough incentive to not take these apart and build anything new out of them, LEGO made sure to design these new molds with the same field socket design from 2008 that would crack if you sneezed in its vicinity. Way to break the mold, guys. They were very colorful at least, and could look quite nice standing together on a shelf with their dynamic shaping and weapons. Keeping in mind how cheap these figures were. Only $8 a pop, getting a hero like this wasn't so bad. I got a couple myself, and I thought they were cute enough. LEGO is really pushing this theme. They wanted it to take off, and in all fairness, it was a promising start with animations, comics, and even a fake radio show.
HEROFACTORY! It's Saturday morning on HEROFACTOry FM.
But we wouldn't see HEROFACTORY practice what it preached until 2011's Ordeal of Fire. Enter CCBS, the Character Creature Building System, an entire new inventory of shells and bones and textures that gave HEROFACTORY more of its own identity. But to call these HEROFACTORY parts is a misnomer. It's just not true. That's like calling many of the leftover elements Bionicle used from earlier lines Throwbot parts. While HEROFACTORY was the first line to use these new pieces, LEGO's purpose for CCBS was to become the new standard for all construction lines going forward, not just this one. In other words, they're bricks, but for action figures. And with this, LEGO struck gold for a time. While pretty basic, the shells and bones came in many sizes and colors, and the sockets were completely redesigned to be very durable. Tight enough to have a good amount of friction, but super easy to pull apart and snap back together over and over. It was such a simple, clean process it encouraged builders to experiment, to try new colors, new heights, new builds, make your hero look however you wanted. I mean, look here, I didn't really care for how the villains looked on the box, so I switched some of the parts around to give them a different look that was more me, because you can do that with this system. It was fresh and new, fulfilling Hero Factory's original promise, and every subsequent wave would give us more flavors of these admittedly pretty basic elements. But again, that basicness is a strength. CCBS was made to bring Bionicle fans and more traditional LEGO fans together, with a smoother, brickier sheen that made these pieces feel less out of place in a system set, and could make brick fanatics feel less dirty cheating on real LEGO with an action figure. It wasn't flawless, but it grabbed our attention. The only thing I really didn't like at the time were the heroes' new headgear. Masks and helmets work best when they have something of a face we can project ourselves onto, see our own humanity in, and these just show that these characters all have the same face underneath. I remember first reviewing these in 2011. Heck, I remember making a whole series of videos, playing with fire, with my own super cringy dark take on the story, with anime sound effects and Dragon Ball Z music because I was a dumb edgelord back then. Matanui, I hate this. I got to film in some interesting locations at least. Heck, in 2012 I also made a comic called Galactic Lampoon. What is with these names? Again, this was my very different take on the story, this time going back to the first wave. That's not how my art looks today, by the way. Speaking of people's history with Hero Factory, I remember first following Jang, then called Lego Jang, back when he'd first started his channel reviewing early Hero Factory sets. Before he really found his groove reviewing Lego in general, he made a few videos showing off custom characters he'd made with CCBS, and they had their own backstories and lore, showing off how flexible the system really was, and opening the minds of people like me to new possibilities. The 2.0 heroes' new look kinda reminded me of the Slicers, with their brighter colors and their weapons including smaller minifig scale parts. They were the same price as the previous heroes, but you got a lot more pieces and the best posability we'd ever seen in any figures this small. Later that year came 3.0, which were basically the same but with a more animalistic look and villains that actually were animals. Witch Doctor in particular showed off some great building techniques in the legs, though the rest of him was kinda so-so. It was still nice to get such a tall figure, the likes of which we hadn't seen since Bionicle, and would not see again. This wave introduced Raka, a gold character that kinda reminded me of Takanuva, the Toe of Light from Bionicle's third year. Because of these similarities, people tend to look at Hero Factory's first few waves as their own trilogy, but it was only a year and a half. Boy, imagine if that was where the line ended. CCBS also provided a good story explanation for why the characters would look different in each new adventure. It's just easy for them to customize themselves for the mission of the day. But by the end of the year, we were already starting to see some of the limitations of this system, with builds that were quickly getting samey. It wasn't enough to impress anyone anymore. 2012 gave us a shot in the arm with a breakout line, with heroes that were taller and more filled out and generally more unique than in previous waves. After so many growing pains, Hero Factory finally found its stride. The biggest change was the packaging. Rather than canisters or boxes, the sets now came in plastic Ziploc bags, like pretzels or fruit snacks. I never hated this, but it always struck me as weird. I kept some of my old Bionicle canisters because there's something kinda special about them, even the Hero Factory ones. It feels more permanent than a cardboard box to me, and the bags were more disposable than even that. There were a few toy lines by other companies doing the same thing around that time, putting their toys in bags. It was an attempt to cut costs while making their toys stand out, but it was just another dumb fad that wouldn't last, and the largest sets still came in boxes. The biggest change besides that was the release schedule. Each wave previously included tiny heroes, sometimes switching team members around, and a few larger villains, but starting with Breakout, each story would have a whole year and 2 waves to itself, giving the designers more room to breathe and include more characters and make them bigger. There were enough new members that they split the current team of 9 heroes into 2 waves, and some of them were pretty good. And some of them were hot rubbish. The villains are very hit or miss too. Some are quite cool, and others are just a cobbled together clump of parts that just kinda hurt to look at for me. One of my favorites is Core Hunter, who's basically a serial killer who goes around tearing out heroes' cores. One thing that was consistently annoying about these figures from wave to wave was how bare and skeletal the backs were, but starting here they did try to cover that up in a few ways, usually with a foot. Interestingly, to buy themselves some time to develop a new type of head and mask, they dialed back to the ones the classic heroes had in the first year since those generally seemed more popular, and they whipped up new helmets in that style for post-CCBS heroes to retroactively make them fit in with the old characters. I think Raka was my favorite. It was just a nice combination of colors and shapes, and I really like Breeze with her round Samus Aran shoulder armor and especially her helmet. It's very bug-like and interesting. This year also saw the release of those gray extension pieces with a rubber ball inside, creating a lot of extra friction so you can make bigger, heavier figures than ever without extra pistons holding them up. While a little hit and miss, this was Hero Factory's strongest year, I think. But this is where things started to unravel. While I said the basic premise of Hero Factory was nice, the actual story that unfolded was pretty weak. While I think it's pretty clear who the main character is, the big villains always had some connection to the Alpha Team's leader, not that Alpha Team, Preston Stormer, in some cases being former heroes themselves, and they always have such a weak motivation, like Von Nebula here. His career as a hero ended when he abandoned Stormer's team during a giant robot attack on their city, and he wants revenge on Stormer for... what? For what Von did? What the heck? And while this kind of story can work when the villain is so focused on the old guard that he's blindsided by the new guy he should have been watching out for, allowing those younger heroes to prove themselves and move up in the world, they repeat the same plot wave after wave, but the status quo never changes. But at least when Breakout rolled around, the story finally looked like it was going somewhere, with the introduction of Anti-Quasar, an evil version of the substance that the heroes' cores are made of, and the whole Breakout being a cover for the real bad guy to steal the factory's blueprints in the ensuing chaos so they could create their own villain factory and build an army of Anti-Quasar fueled villains. Holy cow, this just got interesting. Let's see what happens next. 2013's Brain Attack isn't exactly where I expected the story to go. Instead of a villain factory, we get a brain factory, where a mysterious pair of hands masterminds a series of attacks by creatures who normally aren't very dangerous, being possessed and mutated by brain bugs. Where have I seen this before? No joke, I actually really like the brains. They're like Krata on steroids. The heroes' builds continue to be good in some respects and underwhelming in others. It just felt like we were going through the motions by that point, buying the same characters year after year with some new pieces, and I can see how it was getting hard for the designers to find new ways to keep these characters fresh the 5th time around. I mean, how many Stormers do you need? This is why we'd see supporting characters in Bionicle become new Toa every few years, to keep things from getting repetitive. Still, if you were just jumping in at this point, it's not a bad place to start. The heroes look nice as a team and have some new tricks, nice colors and gear, a little less all over the place than in Breakout, but also a little less substantial. The Fenos Nightly form is the best the characters ever looked, and it's all downhill from here. The villains surprise me. Looking at any one of them at a time, they're not that great, but stand 2 or 3 of them together on a shelf and they really bring out the best of each other. They just pop with their more naturalistic rock and fur textures, their giant aggressive faces with loads of detail, a more elemental feel than usual, and that extra bit of panache added by the brain bugs. I like how each monster has a differently colored brain bug, even if they all end up having the red eyes. They even managed to work in some functions, another reference to the beasts of Bionicle. They weren't great functions, and in some cases they made the figures harder to pose, but it was okay practice for what was to come in another year or two. Both the heroes and villains shared a new head this time that trades facial features for more connection points, able to fit inside Bionicle-style masks from the front and later helmets that fall on top. They also have a better neck socket and even a pin on the back for visors to clip onto. It's a neat evolution of the head mold that I didn't like too much at the time, but can see how it'd be great for mocks. While I still think Hero Factory peaked with Breakout, it's hard for me to decide which of these 2 lines I like more as toys. It kinda depends on what mood I'm in that day. I think Brain Attack is a valid year in its own right, but maybe now we can get back to that whole Villain Factory subplot, or at least find out who made the brains. Nope, another cliffhanger and another derailment into a completely different plot with Invasion from Below, Hero Factory's biggest line yet. Sort of. Now attacked by giant beasts, the heroes had to build mech suits to combat them. I think this was another attempt by LEGO to blur the lines between system and construction, representing these characters with minifigs that I actually like a lot. I understand some people find this concept silly, as if they're robots, why don't they just download their consciousness into a larger body, or plug their hero core into it rather? Well, they were trying to do something different, and if they just made the same figures but told us they were big, and shrunk the backgrounds to make them look bigger in the packaging, it wouldn't change a thing. As stumpy and rather average as these builds look for their pieces, I can appreciate the idea, though I have to admit that by this point your typical Hero Factory set was looking more and more like a glorified parts pack. After years of collecting, I had loads of spare pieces in compatible colors, so I cannibalized them all and built the craziest darn mix I could. I can appreciate how experimental these were though, especially the less humanoid looking ones, and the beasts are... alright. But see, that's what I mean by calling normal figures bigger when the builds are actually pretty lackluster, and by the end the writing was on the wall. Anytime the story started to pick up speed, it got switched to another track. The cartoons were getting shorter and, well, worse. There was less promotion, and after such a big change, where do you go from there? Hero Factory had become a completely different line by then, in no way resembling what it started out as, and going back to fighting normal villains when they got these giant mechs might feel like a step back. There just wasn't much more to do with the concept, and we clearly weren't ever going to see those old plot threads revisited. LEGO had already given up on Hero Factory, and we soon did too. But there were other things on the horizon, for better or worse. Hero Factory had a troubled life, some ups, some more downs. It chugged on for a while, but if you think about it, the whole theme was basically the training wheels for lines like Bionicle to return using some of the same pieces. It was a bold new way of building, and it took some time for LEGO to bring out its full potential. They had a lot of oddities to work out, but by then we'd seen just about everything it could do. I've theorized for a while that if Bionicle hadn't been cancelled in 2010, we would have seen characters like the Element Lords or even Toa built using those same shells and bones that would appear in G2. It would actually work for the Glatorians since they're supposed to be fleshier than normal Bionicle characters. Bionicle was going to look like that no matter what. And while Hero Factory had a strong enough start, somewhere along the way it became a dumping ground for all of LEGO's half-baked ideas they didn't want to save for other themes. They just couldn't stick to one vision and commit to it. But I still think that with it came a lot of good. Unfortunately, the years that followed have been a sad state of affairs, one misfire after another, and now it seems like Construction may be dead, gone for good. But one can hope we may one day see LEGO revolutionize the way we build figures again. I have more to say about this topic, but I'll save that for another time, later in the season. That's it for today. If you want to support my work, please consider my graphic novel series Planet Ripple. You can buy the books on Amazon or read an early draft of the first book for free. Links to everything in the description. Next up, we'll go back to the Attitude Era to see some old friends from the LEGO Island. See ya!
Hero Factory, please state your emergency.
The tentacle monster's back!
New LEGO Hero Factory uses only the best armor, helmets, weapons, and mighty hero core to build the toughest heroes. Now you can join Furno, Surge, and Breeze as they do battle against the galaxy's most evil monsters and villains.